The air in the break room of Precinct 47 was thick with the smell of stale coffee and unsaid regrets. Detective Ethan Vance, all crisp uniform and nervous energy, was exactly 6 months out of the academy. Tonight was his first full graveyard shift, the dreaded midnight to 8 a.m., and the precinct felt less like a police station and more like a mausoleum for forgotten laws. His training officer, Sergeant Alistair MacKenzie, a man whose face was a roadmap of stress and nicotine, slammed a mug onto the chipped counter. "Listen up, Vance. This ain't Hollywood. P47 is the quietest goddamn station in the city. We babysit cold cases and keep the paperwork flowing. Nothing happens here." "Yes, Sergeant," Ethan said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. He glanced around. The station was a brutalist block of concrete built in the late 70s, scheduled for demolition next year. It had a reputation, but Mac had always dismissed it as old-timer nonsense. Mac pointed to a dusty, locked door near the back hallway, tucked behind the overflowing evidence lockers. "See that? The old Records Annex closed off for 20 years. Don't go near it. Smell the mold? It's a biohazard waiting to happen. Got it?" "Understood, Sergeant. Stay away from the annex." The first few hours were exactly as Mac described, mind-numbing silence punctuated by the hum of fluorescent lights and the rhythmic thunk of Mac stamping old reports. Around 2:30 a.m., a bizarre call came in, not from a panicked citizen, but from a nearby automated city maintenance sensor. Automated alert, unauthorized entry detected. Sublevel 3 maintenance hatch. Precinct 47 grounds. Mac's eyes narrowed. Sublevel 3? That's the deepest part of the foundation. They sealed that off when they found all the drainage problems in '98. Maybe a homeless person found a way in? Ethan suggested. "Nobody goes down there, Vance. It's nothing but flooded tunnels and ancient piping. We check it out. Standard procedure." They took the elevator down to the main evidence storage on Sublevel 1. The air immediately changed. It was heavy, frigid, and carried a faint, metallic scent, like old blood and rust. They followed the blueprint Mac pulled up on his tablet, navigating through a maze of wire mesh cages. The access point to Sublevel 3 wasn't a hatch door, but a rusted iron gate secured with a chain that was still intact, the lock covered in a thick layer of dust. "Well, so much for unauthorized entry," Mac grumbled, checking the lock. "Sensor malfunction. Told you this place was falling apart." Ethan shined his flashlight beam around. It caught something on the concrete floor, about 10 feet in front of the gate. It was a perfectly straight line, a scratch etched deep into the stone, leading towards the gate. "Wait, Sergeant," Ethan whispered. He pointed the light. "Look at the floor. That wasn't here 20 years ago." Mac knelt, his hand hovering over the scratch. It was too straight, too uniform to be an accident. It looked like something heavy, and very sharp, had been dragged precisely to the gate. Then, Ethan's flashlight beam illuminated a small object caught in the iron bars of the gate. It was a key. Not a brass key, but an old, black, hand-forged iron key, unlike anything they use today. As Mac reached for it, a sound echoed from beyond the sealed gate, from the blackness of Sublevel 3. It wasn't a scraping or a clanging. It was a single, wet, ragged gasp. Mac froze, his hand inches from the key. His cynicism evaporated, replaced by a look of profound, chilling recognition. "Mac? What was that?" Ethan gripped his sidearm. Mac didn't answer immediately. He stared at the key, then back at the dusty, off-limits door up on the ground floor, the Records Annex. "The key?" Mac breathed, his voice barely a rasp. "It's the key to the annex, Vance. They said they lost it decades ago." He slowly picked up the key. It was cold to the touch, and from the darkness behind the gate, the single gasp was repeated, louder this time, followed by a sound that made Ethan's blood run cold, the faint, unmistakable noise of a police radio transmission, warped, broken, and playing a call sign he didn't recognize. H. The warped, static-choked voice echoing from Sublevel 3 sent a spike of adrenaline through Detective Vance. It wasn't just a radio, it sounded like a frantic distress call. P-47. Officer down, requesting immediate back-up. Location Annex 1983. Mac's hand tightened around the antique iron key, his face pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. That's impossible, Vance. The annex hasn't been used since '98. And that call sign? 1983? That was an old frequency, decommissioned years before I joined. Someone's playing a prank, Sergeant. Or there's a relay deep inside the old infrastructure. Ethan tried to rationalize it, but the chilling immediacy of the "officer down" plea was too real. No, this station, it's got teeth, Mac muttered, moving away from the gate. Forget Sublevel 3. We go upstairs. Now. We need to check the annex. But the key was here, Ethan protested, indicating the sealed gate. Doesn't that mean the intruder is down there? The sensor triggered the alarm, yes, but the gate is locked from the outside. Something placed that key here. And if that key is tied to that radio call, the danger isn't in the basement, it's right under our noses. They practically ran back up to the ground floor. The station, previously quiet, now seemed to breathe around them. Every shadow felt deeper, every sound amplified. Mac inserted the heavy iron key into the ancient lock of the Records Annex door. It turned with a deafening, metallic shriek that echoed through the empty hallway. He pushed the door open. A cloud of dry, freezing air and the smell of decomposing paper hit them. They stepped inside, shining their flashlights over towering shelves of manila files and dusty boxes. The room was not just neglected, it was a snapshot of the past, untouched for decades. Stay sharp, Vance. Use your comms, but keep it quiet. No need to wake the desk sergeant. As they moved deeper into the labyrinth of files, Ethan's foot snagged on something. He shined his light down. On the concrete floor, a small, worn police badge lay face up. The number was faded, but discernible, 47-09. Sergeant, look at this. An old badge. Mac picked it up. His jaw clenched. 47-09, that was Officer Jacob Thorne. Went missing on duty back in '97. They never found him. Marked as a presumed drowning, fell into the old drainage system near the station. The radio transmission from downstairs suddenly cut through the silence of the annex, now sounding much clearer, as if the source was nearby. Last transmission, code 10-50. Annex. He's here. He knows the tunnels. 47-09. He's locked the records. The voice was frantic, desperate, and then it dissolved into a horrible, wet, choking sound, ending in pure static. Ethan felt the hair rise on his arms. Sergeant, that radio is in this room. Mac didn't move, his eyes fixed on a specific shelf in the back corner, a shelf reserved for high-security evidence in heavily taped boxes. Thorne's last known assignment, Mac said, his voice flat. He was working cold cases. Specifically, the locker key killer files. A string of disappearances from the early '90s, all related to a storage unit facility near here. They approached the shelf. All the boxes were coated in the same thick layer of dust, except for one. Box LK-09. It was slightly ajar, and the dust on top of it was disturbed, showing a fresh, dark smudge. Mac pulled the box down. Inside, instead of police files, there was a single, disturbing item, a child's worn-out leather school bag, meticulously cleaned, and placed on top of a folded, crisp note. The note was written in clean, precise block letters. Ethan read it over Mac's shoulder. The key was not lost. It was given. The records do not lie, but the walls remember. Come find what 47-09 left behind. As Mac reached for the school bag, the heavy iron annex door behind them suddenly slammed shut. The lock mechanism snapped into place with a definitive, mechanical sound. They were trapped. Panic was a cold, sharp thing, but Mac's decades of training kicked in immediately. He charged the bolted door, throwing his shoulder against the thick wood. It didn't budge. No good, Mac grunted, rubbing his shoulder. That lock is ancient but solid. We're on the city's oldest independent power grid down here. No signal, no direct line out. And if that radio call was real, whoever locked us in is still here. Ethan kept his flashlight fixed on the school bag resting inside the evidence box, LK-09. It was a small, brown leather satchel, the kind a boy might have carried in the late 80s or early 90s. It felt unnervingly light. The bag, Sergeant. Let's see what Thorne left us, Ethan urged, his voice trembling slightly. Mac hesitated for a moment, then reached for the bag with gloved hands. He unbuckled the main strap. Inside, there wasn't a lunch or school books. There was only one thing, a small, tarnished silver key, attached to a cheap, plastic keychain shaped like a cartoon skull. This is it, Mac whispered. The calling card. The locker key killer earned his name because he left a single, anonymous locker key with every victim's family, implying their loved one was locked away somewhere, waiting. Did they ever trace the keys? Ethan asked. Never. They were standard keys for cheap rental lockers, no serials. But the keychains were the signature. That specific skull keychain was sold in a novelty shop that closed down in '93. Mac stared at the skull. This key, it's a taunt. A message to Thorne. As Mac spoke, a sudden shift occurred in the atmosphere. The intense cold of the annex receded, replaced by a suffocating, heavy heat. And with the heat came a sound, a slow, rhythmic drip, 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 coming from somewhere deep within the ceiling tiles. Ethan instinctively looked up. The ceiling tiles were stained and sagging, but one tile, directly above the shelving unit, seemed darker, almost glistening. Sergeant, listen, Ethan whispered, pointing up. That dripping isn't water. They both looked closer as another drop fell. It wasn't clear. It was thick, viscous, and dark, the color of old, oxidized blood. Mac's hand went to his radio, but he remembered, no signal. We need to get out of the radius of whatever that is, he said, pulling Ethan back from the shelves. As they retreated, the radio transmission from Sublevel 3 flared to life again, but this time, it wasn't a voice. It was a cacophony of sound, a sharp crack of breaking glass, the terrified scream of a man, followed by a distorted whisper that seemed to speak directly into Ethan's mind, bypassing his ears. You opened the lock. Now the walls remember the face of the liar. The voice was cold, echoing, and inhuman. Mac shone his flashlight toward the source of the radio's sudden static burst. It led them back to the entrance, but not the locked door. In the wall adjacent to the sealed door, a section of old, brittle plaster had crumbled away. Behind it, in the damp darkness of the internal cavity, was a crude drawing scratched into the foundation concrete. It depicted a stick figure being stabbed repeatedly by another figure holding a long, sharp object. Beneath the drawing, etched deep into the concrete, were three initials, J.T. J.T. Jacob Thorne, Ethan breathed. He was killed down here. He found something, and whoever the killer is, they trapped him and memorialized it. Mac looked at the silver key in his hand, then at the disturbing drawing, and finally at the locked door. If Thorne was down here, he must have been trying to hide the key, not deliver it. He didn't want anyone to find the locker. He feared what was inside. He held the small silver key up. This key belongs to a storage locker. If we can find the registry, we can find the location. It's our only way to know what Thorn was trying to hide. Suddenly, the lights in the annex, the old, sputtering fluorescent tubes, began to flash violently, turning the room into a strobing nightmare. The rhythmic drip, drip, drip from the ceiling became a frantic, splashing sound, and then, a new sound cut through the chaos, coming from the other side of the bolted door, just inches away from them, the heavy, distinct sound of boots dragging slowly across concrete. Someone, or something, was outside the door, waiting. The slow, deliberate scrape of heavy boots outside the annex door was agonizing. It moved back and forth, a patrol of dread, confirming they were trapped and not alone. "They know we're in here," Ethan whispered, clutching his flashlight. "We can't just wait." Mac was already moving, his face set in a grim mask. "We go back to basics. If we can't go through the door, we go around it. This building is a sieve of faulty plumbing and utility chases." He led Ethan deeper into the annex, ignoring the flickering lights and the increasingly rapid, sickening splatter from the ceiling. He stopped at a section of shelving that looked marginally newer, installed perhaps in the late 90s, just before the room was sealed. The original design had a utility access hatch here, connected to the HVAC system, Mac explained, pulling at a row of dusty file boxes. When they remodeled, they walled it up, but cheap labor, they probably just drywalled over the old panel. He gave the wall a sharp kick. It sounded hollow. Mac retrieved a crowbar from his belt, a tool every P-47 veteran kept close, and began prying at the seam of the drywall. As the plaster cracked, the radio transmission returned. It wasn't static this time. It was a clear, calm, bone-chilling voice, seemingly speaking from the precinct's main intercom, though they hadn't heard the telltale click of activation. "Detective MacKenzie and Officer Vance. You have retrieved the first piece. You are following the path. We do not want you to stop. Thorn's key opens the door to the truth." The voice paused, then added a single, terrifying directive: "The sub-registry ledger is on shelf 5, box 3. Find the address." Mac froze, the crowbar suspended in midair. "How the hell did it know our names and exactly where the ledger is?" "It's playing with us, Sergeant," Ethan said, his voice taut. "It wants us to go to that locker." Mac threw the crowbar down. "We don't follow orders from ghosts, Vance. But that voice, it's too calm. Too real. Let's check the box. We need the location to identify the victim, not follow a killer's script." They located shelf 5, box 3. Inside, under a stack of irrelevant traffic violation reports, they found the ledger, heavy, cloth-bound logbook detailing the maintenance and registry of the storage facilities across the city that were used as temporary evidence holding units in the early 90s. Mac flipped through the brittle pages until he found the section marked "Locker Keys, Unit Number." He scanned the columns, his finger stopping at a handwritten entry dated June 1993. Key tag, Skull Novelty. Unit, L-12B. Location, West End Storage Facility, decommissioned. Contents, high-priority evidence, case file LK-09. L-12B, Mac read aloud. West End Storage. That place was abandoned right after the disappearances stopped. It's been derelict for 30 years. Suddenly, the lights went out completely. The annex plunged into total, suffocating blackness. Only their flashlights cut through the void. The dripping from the ceiling became a downpour, the thick, dark fluid splashing onto the wooden floorboards, instantly filling the room with a sickening, metallic stench. Then, from the darkness just beyond the sealed door, the slow, scraping drag of the boots stopped. A new sound began, a frantic, heavy pounding on the other side of the door, accompanied by a low, guttural snarling. He's trying to get through," Ethan yelled. "Forget the ledger, Vance, we move." Mac seized the crowbar and jammed it into the weak drywall panel. He tore a gaping hole, revealing the tight, rusted darkness of the utility crawlspace behind it. "You first." "It connects to the old drainage tunnels, but it's our only way out," Mac ordered. Ethan scrambled into the tight, metal-smelling passage just as the wood around the annex door began to splinter violently. Mac paused at the hole, looking back at the desk where the ledger lay open. He grabbed the small, silver locker key and the menacing skull keychain. "L12B, West End," he muttered, committing it to memory. Just as he turned to follow Ethan, a dark, heavy shadow fell over the hole in the wall. A massive, gloved hand, covered in what looked like dried mud and rust, reached through the splintered wood of the door and began blindly searching the air. Mac squeezed into the crawlspace just as the wooden frame gave way with a splintering crash. The last thing he saw before plunging into the darkness was the massive figure's silhouette, filling the doorway, its head tilting as if listening for their retreat. The utility chase was a nightmare of rusted metal, jagged edges, and suffocating darkness. Mac led the way, his years of local knowledge guiding them through the stench of sewage and damp concrete. "Stay close, Vance. These tunnels haven't been mapped since the 70s, Mac rasped, his voice bouncing off the close walls. "We're aiming for the old sewer line that runs under Elm Street. It's the only one that doesn't loop back toward Sublevel 3. Ethan, scraping his elbows raw on the narrow metal floor, had his flashlight trained on Mac's worn boots. "Sergeant, that radio call, it knew the ledger's location. This isn't just a physical break-in. It feels guided. It's a psychological assault, Vance. They studied the cold cases, they know the legends of P-47, and they're using the building's history against us," Mac argued, though his tone lacked conviction. They crawled for what felt like an hour, the metallic stench slowly giving way to a new, sharper smell, sulfur and decaying electrical wiring. Mac stopped abruptly. "We're close. The sewer line should be right below us." He shone his light up a thick, galvanized pipe running along the ceiling of the crawlspace. As the beam hit the pipe, they saw it wasn't just old, it was covered in a thick, dark growth, almost like petrified moss, pulsating slightly in the heat. More disturbing were the markings etched into the pipe's surface, repeated over and over. They weren't graffiti. They were complex, geometric symbols, circles nested within triangles, intersected by sharp, broken lines. "What are those?" Ethan breathed. "Some kind of gang sign?" Mac touched the pipe with the back of his hand and instantly recoiled. "Cold. And not just cold, it feels dead." He pointed his flashlight lower. "Look at the floor." The grime on the concrete floor was not uniform. In the center of the crawlspace, directly beneath the marked pipe, the dirt and rust had been meticulously scraped away, revealing a patch of pristine concrete. On this clean patch, someone had painstakingly drawn the same geometric symbol using the thick, dark fluid that had been dripping in the annex. As they stared at the symbol, the silence of the tunnel was shattered by a low, guttural moan that echoed from the passage they had just crawled through. The thing from the annex was following. "Hurry!" Mac scrambled ahead, ripping a loose metal grate off the floor. Underneath was a vertical drop into a wider, darker space. "It's the old maintenance shaft. It's a 30-foot drop, but it's our ticket out." Ethan, without hesitation, dropped his flashlight on its strap and swung down, catching a rung on a rusted, vertical ladder. As Mac prepared to follow, his flashlight caught something tucked into the corner near the shaft entrance. It was a police utility belt, old, cracked leather, but recognizable. Attached to the belt was a small, two-way radio, still powered on, its TX transmit light blinking slowly. It was the source of the chilling transmissions. Mac grabbed the radio just as a tremendous bang shook the tunnel walls behind him, showering him with dust and debris. He climbed quickly down the ladder, joining Ethan on the floor of the shaft. He held up the recovered radio. I got the source. It's Thorne's radio. Still tuned to the old P-47 frequency. Did you see anything? Ethan asked, breathless. The radio, it was placed there. And whatever is back there, it's big and moving fast. Mac shone his light around their new location. They were in a massive, brick-lined drainage tunnel, big enough to drive a truck through. The only sound was the far-off rush of water. Suddenly, the small, antique radio in Mac's hand crackled to life. But it wasn't the calm, guiding voice from before. It was a frantic, synthesized female voice, like an old automated emergency broadcast. Warning, high contagion protocol initiated. Sublevel 3 structural breach. Target vector identified as code 47-09. Containment failure imminent. Do not approach the geometry. Do not open L12B. The warning repeated 3 times, then the radio went dead. The TX light extinguished for good. Mac and Ethan looked at each other. The tunnel was their only escape, but the radio's warning had just tied everything together: the lost officer, the geometric symbols, and the key to locker L12B. We have to get to that locker, Sergeant. Now, Ethan stated, the fear in his voice replaced by a grim determination. Whatever 47-09 is, it seems to be heading there, and if the city knows about it, we have to beat them to it. Mac and Ethan found themselves at the bottom of the maintenance shaft, surrounded by the cool, stale air of the vast drainage tunnel. The synthetic warning from the radio still echoed in their minds, raising the stakes from a simple missing person case to a potentially catastrophic cover-up. Contagion protocol, Ethan repeated, staring at the dead radio in Mac's hand. They're covering up what happened to Thorne, and it's tied to that geometry. And that geometry is all over the tunnels, Mac said, shining his light down the long, cylindrical passage. We need to get out of this sewer system. The main access point should be about a mile east, the old pumping station on Elm. They started running, their boots slapping against the damp brick floor. The air in the tunnel felt heavy, and the distant sound of rushing water created unnerving acoustic effects, making it impossible to tell if the sounds were coming from miles away or right behind them. After about 20 minutes of jogging through the dark, their flashlights caught something that stopped them cold. A fresh trail dot on the floor of the tunnel, mixed with the damp silt, was a series of heavy, deep indentations. They were too large and too evenly spaced to be animal tracks, and too deep to be normal boot prints. The same prints we heard outside the annex, Mac stated, pointing his light. Whatever it is, it's massive, and it's moving faster than we are. And it's going the same direction. Suddenly, Ethan's foot kicked something small and metallic near the wall. He picked it up. It was a small, rusted metal plate, about the size of a license plate, but without any numbers. It was simply painted black, and in the center, etched with precision, was the same complex geometric symbol they had seen in the utility chase. It's marking its path, Ethan realized, feeling a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. It's not trying to hide. It's guiding us. Luring us. They pressed on, urgency replacing caution. The tunnel curved, and they finally saw the exit point, a large, rusted-out iron grill, partially open, leading into the basement of a derelict building. They could hear the faint, muffled sound of city traffic above. They scrambled out of the sewer and into a damp, stone basement. The air was breathable, but thick with the smell of mold and long-dead decay. We made it, Ethan gasped, leaning against a crumbling wall. Mac, however, wasn't celebrating. He was staring at a massive, ancient boiler against the far wall. On the boiler's grimy surface, someone had painted in thick, black paint, freshly applied, a single set of words: West End Storage Facility. L12B. Follow the sign. Below the words, covering a large area of the boiler, was a meticulously rendered, giant version of the geometric symbol. This isn't just following, Mac said, his voice hard. This is choreography. It wants us to think we're smart enough to solve the puzzle, but we're just pieces on its board. Then we play the game, Ethan retorted, adjusting his uniform. We have the key. We have the address. We're going to L12B. They found the basement exit, a set of rickety wooden stairs leading up to an unlocked service door. They emerged into the pre-dawn stillness of an industrial park. Mac pulled out his standard police radio, checking the frequency. Static. They were too far out of range of P-47's old booster antennas. We walk. It's a mile to West End Storage, Mac said, starting down the deserted street. As they walked, the tension, which had been high, suddenly broke. A car appeared far down the street, a late model, black sedan with tinted windows. It slowed as it approached them. Stay calm, Vance. Could be patrol, Mac said, raising his hand slightly, signaling they were officers. The sedan stopped 20 feet away. The passenger window rolled down slowly, revealing not a uniform, but the face of a nervous-looking, middle-aged man in a cheap suit. He didn't look like a threat, but the car was immaculate, out of place among the industrial decay. The man spoke, his voice clipped and quiet. Officers. You shouldn't be here. The chief has been alerted to a structural instability at Precinct 47. You need to return immediately. Mac narrowed his eyes. Who are you? What chief? Our shift is until 8 a.m. The man looked directly at Mac, his eyes betraying a genuine, chilling fear. I am cleanup. And the chief I speak of is not your department's. The protocol has failed. If you have the key, give it to me. Do not go to L12B. What's inside is not evidence. It is the original contagion. Before Mac could respond, the man's eyes flickered to something over their shoulders, his face going rigid with terror. It found you, the man whispered, his voice cracking. A sharp, metallic crunch echoed from the dark alley behind them. The black sedan's driver slammed the accelerator, and the car peeled away, tires squealing, disappearing into the city haze. Mac and Ethan spun around, guns drawn, pointing their flashlights at the source of the noise. It wasn't the hulking, slow-moving killer from the Annex. It was a perfectly clean, brand-new police cruiser, one they recognized from their own precinct's fleet, that had been meticulously crushed into a cube, no larger than a vending machine. The engine block and chassis were pressed together, yet the paint was unscratched, and standing silently beside the impossibly crushed metal cube was the silhouette of a figure. It was massive, far taller than any man, and its body seemed to shimmer, making the very air around it look warped and distorted. It was holding something in its right hand, a large, rusted iron bar. And as they watched, it slowly, deliberately, scraped the tip of the bar against the pavement, creating a loud, screeching noise. The noise wasn't random. It was the precise, geometric symbol, being etched onto the street, marking the next path. The sight of the impossibly crushed cruiser and the towering, shimmering figure was a final, brutal confirmation. This was beyond any police procedural. The locker key killer was something alien, powerful, and deeply rooted in the history of Precinct 47. Run, Vance. Now! Mac roared, grabbing Ethan's arm and sprinting toward a gap between two warehouses. They ran hard, weaving through the industrial maze. Ethan risked a look back. The massive entity wasn't running, it was walking slowly, deliberately, the long iron bar scraping the asphalt, leaving a trail of the glowing geometric symbol in its wake. It moved with a terrifying sense of absolute certainty. It knows where we're going. Ethan yelled, ducking under a chain-link fence. It wants us to go to West End Storage. Then we change the plan. Mac yelled back, pulling out his ancient city map, creased and stained. The storage unit is a trap. We need a way to communicate, to call in a team, but no signal. Ethan pointed across a deserted rail yard. Sergeant, Look! The old city tower repeater station. It was shut down a decade ago, but the antenna array is still there. If we can get inside, we might be able to manually boost a distress call. The repeater station was a small, fortified concrete building, topped with a massive, rusting lattice of antenna dishes. It was miles out of their jurisdiction, but it was their only chance for an emergency transmission. They reached the perimeter fence of the repeater station. It was locked with a heavy industrial padlock. Too slow, Mac muttered, pulling out his service weapon. Wait, Sergeant. Ethan pointed to a faded, barely visible symbol scratched into the concrete post next to the lock. It was the familiar geometry. The same marking, Ethan said, mystified. But why here? Is it a warning, or an invitation? Mac, fueled by desperation, ignored the mystery and fired a single, carefully aimed shot into the padlock mechanism. The lock shattered, and they burst through the gate. Inside, the building was silent and dusty. They found the main communications room, a wall of flickering monitors and dusty, decommissioned radio equipment. Mac immediately went to the main antenna terminal, ripping off the security panel. The power's off, but the emergency generator should still have enough fuel to kick the transmitter on for 30 seconds, Mac explained, frantically working the ancient wires. Ethan stood guard at the heavily barred window. The moment Mac finished connecting the wires, the main console shuddered, and a high-pitched, whining sound filled the room as the generator sputtered to life. Mac grabbed a microphone. This is Detective MacKenzie, Precinct 47, Code 10-33. Officer safety issue. Repeat, officer safety issue. Requesting immediate backup to West End storage facility. The massive console suddenly went silent. The generator died, plunging the room into darkness. No, no, no. Mac hit the panel with his fist. Did it go through? I don't know, Sergeant, Ethan said, shining his light toward the window. But I think we just got its attention. From outside, the quiet was replaced by a rhythmic, metallic pulsing, like a massive heart beating. The ground under the concrete floor began to vibrate violently. Ethan looked out the window. The shimmer was back. The tall, menacing figure had reached the fence and was slowly, deliberately, pushing the thick metal chain links apart with its bare hands. The metal groaned in protest. It cut the power line, Mac realized, looking at a sparking, severed cable running outside. It didn't want us to warn anyone. It's coming through the fence, Mac. We have to move. As they retreated down the hallway, the pulsing grew louder, and a new sound joined it, a sharp, grinding noise, coming from the thick metal door they had just used. Ethan grabbed Mac's shoulder. The emergency exit. Back of the building. They found the heavy, fire-rated door. Mac shouldered it open, and they tumbled out into the early morning light. The West End storage facility was visible about a quarter of a mile away, a massive, decaying block of concrete units, but standing directly between them and the storage facility, parked across the road, was the black, unmarked sedan from the industrial park. The driver's door opened, and the nervous man, the clean-up man, stepped out. This time, he wasn't nervous. He looked terrified, but resolute that he held up a heavy, military-grade field radio. MacKenzie! Stop! The transmission went through, but they won't believe it. The protocol is coming to the storage facility. You need to give me the key, he yelled, his voice desperate. I am Agent Dorn. I'm with the Department of Extranormal Containment. This isn't a murder, it's a breach. That geometry is a containment barrier, and Thorne broke it. The massive grinding sound from the repeater station intensified. They knew the entity was seconds away from bursting through the door. Mac looked at the silver locker key in his hand, then at Agent Dorn. What's in L-12B? Dorn's eyes were wide with panic. The original source. the body of the first victim from 1990. The host. Thorne tried to lock it away, but the geometry needs to feed. If you open it, the contagion is unleashed into the world. Mac looked at the distant, imposing structure of the West End storage facility, then back at the door that was beginning to buckle from the force behind it. We go to the locker, Mac decided, ignoring Dorn's plea. The entity is guiding us there. If it wants the key, it's not to unlock a bomb, it's to retrieve something vital. We need to know what that is before your cleanup team incinerates the whole area. You're making a mistake. Dorn screamed, lowering his radio and reaching for his sidearm. I can't let you open it. Suddenly, the front door of the repeater station exploded outward in a shower of concrete and shrapnel. The massive entity stepped out, its form shimmering and growing, the iron bar held high. It let out a deafening, scraping scream that was less a sound and more a physical wave of pain. The scream wasn't directed at Mac or Ethan. It was aimed directly at Agent Dorn. The towering entity's scream seemed to paralyze Agent Dorn. Mac and Ethan used the precious seconds of distraction to bolt. They ignored Dorn and the creature, sprinting directly toward the massive, desolate outline of the West End storage facility. As they ran, they heard the sickening sounds of impact behind them. The creature was engaging Agent Dorn. The sounds were non-stop, metal ripping, concrete cracking, and a muffled, desperate human yell. They didn't dare look back. They reached the fence surrounding the West End complex. It was a sprawling, multi-tiered facility, abandoned for decades. The gate hung loose on rusted hinges. We need Unit L-12B, Mac gasped, pulling the silver locker key out of his pocket. Locker 12, Block B. That should be on the middle tier. The compound was a chilling sight. Thousands of storage unit doors lined the concrete corridors, all sealed and covered in 3 decades of dust and grime. The air was thick with the smell of decay and a sweet, chemical odor, like formaldehyde mixed with ozone. They took the external staircase to the second level, Block B. As they reached the top, they saw why the entity was obsessed with guiding them here. Every 20 feet along the corridor, the floor, ceiling, and the corrugated steel doors were covered in meticulously drawn, black markings. The geometric symbol was repeated hundreds of times, overlapping and interwoven, creating a complex, shimmering tapestry. The geometry, Ethan whispered, running his hand over the marks. They were cold to the touch. It's a pattern of power. A battery, or a lock. Or a containment grid, Mac corrected, remembering Dorn's words. It looks like a jail cell drawn on the world. They found Unit L-12. It was in a dark recess of the corridor. Unlike the surrounding units, the door was pristine, scrubbed clean of all dust and markings, gleaming dully in their flashlight beams, but L-12B was not completely empty. Taped to the door, at eye level, was a single, faded photograph. It was a picture of Officer Jacob Thorne, 47-09, young and smiling, standing next to a boy in a brown leather school bag, the same boy whose bag they found in the annex below the picture. Written in the same precise block letters as the note in the annex, was a message: I told the lie for them. Now I am the key. Forgive me, son. Ethan felt a sickening lurch in his gut. Thorne found the body of the boy, the host. He didn't just hide the evidence, he helped the containment protocol and then killed himself in the tunnels to cover it up, leaving the key for someone to find the truth later. He was protecting the city from what was inside, Mac finished, his voice heavy. He looked at the silver key. If this is the host, and the creature wants it, then opening this locker could be exactly what the creature needs. Suddenly, the floor of the corridor vibrated. The rhythmic metallic pulsing they had heard at the repeater station returned, much louder now, resonating through the concrete. The entity was here. And it was inside the complex. We're out of time, Vance. If that thing gets the key, or gets to this locker first, we'll never know what we're fighting. Mac said, shoving the small silver key into the lock of L12B. The key turned smoothly, clicking the lock open. Mac reached out and slid the door of the storage unit open, revealing the absolute blackness within. The chemical ozone smell intensified, making their eyes water. He trained his flashlight inside. The unit was small, but pristine. In the center of the concrete floor sat a single object. It was a simple wooden footlocker, the kind soldiers use. It was sealed with a heavy, old-fashioned brass padlock. The word "host" was stenciled crudely on the lid. As Mac stepped toward the footlocker, the entire corridor lit up. Not with light, but with a terrifying, ethereal glow emanating from the geometric symbols painted on the walls. The symbols began to pulse with a faint, green inner luminescence, creating the dizzying, shimmering effect of a cage coming to life, and then, a new voice echoed through the corridor, not the warped radio voice, nor the calm synthetic voice, but a voice that sounded like Mac's own, but stretched and slowed, coming from just behind them. "You came for the truth, MacKenzie. You found the cage. Now give me the final lock." They spun around. The entity was standing at the end of the corridor, blocking their only escape. It was even taller up close, its surface shimmering like heat haze over asphalt. It wasn't organic. It looked like a living sculpture of black, compacted smoke and rusted metal, and in its outstretched, impossibly long hand, it held a small, familiar object. It was the brass key to the footlocker marked "Host." The entity smiled. Its face was simply a concentration of the swirling smoke, but the expression was unmistakable, cruel, ancient victory. "The key, it wasn't the silver one," Ethan stammered, his eyes darting between the entity and the footlocker. "The silver key was to the room," Mac said, his voice flat with horror. "The brass key is the final lock. And it has it." The creature started to walk toward them, its footsteps silent. The green light pulsing from the geometric symbols intensified, bathing the corridor in a sickly, otherworldly light. It raised the brass key high above its head. "This is the contagion, MacKenzie. This is the geometry of the original lie. And you brought me the door." The entity, the geometer, stood poised at the mouth of the corridor, the brass key glinting faintly in the sickening green light cast by the geometric symbols. Its voice, the chilling echo of Mac's own, hammered at their resolve. "The geometry is not a lock, detective. It is a language. A record of the lie your city built on this earth," the geometer hissed, taking a slow, heavy step forward. Thorne understood the geometry. He saw the truth in the walls of Station 47. He became a key. "What lie?" Mac demanded, gripping his gun tighter. The locker key killer was just a serial murderer. A murderer who understood the patterns, the geometer corrected, raising the brass key. The first victim, the host, was not killed by a man, but by the pattern itself. The city's foundations were laid over a deep wound in the earth, a place where reality thins. The geometry is a scar. And the host is the point of infection. As it spoke, the entity moved its free hand, sweeping it over the glowing geometric pattern on the wall. The symbols shimmered, and the corrugated steel of the storage unit door next to them began to melt and distort, bubbling like molten plastic. "It's manipulating the structure," Ethan realized, his voice strained. "The geometry isn't just paint, it's an energy field." Mac quickly looked at the wooden footlocker inside L12B. "Vance, we can't let it open that. Dorn said it was the contagion." "It's already loose, detective," the geometer chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "The host is a catalyst. A point of entry. Once the final lock is turned, the barrier weakens, and the geometry spreads beyond these pathetic human walls." The geometer took another step, its massive form filling the corridor. It was now only 20 feet away. Mac glanced desperately around the small, 2-foot gap between the footlocker and the concrete wall of L12B. It wants the host free, but it needs to turn the key. That's our only chance. We can't fight it, Sergeant. It crushed a car. Ethan whispered. We don't fight it, we disrupt the ritual. Mac yelled. He fired 3 rapid shots at the geometer's chest. The bullets hit the shimmering form and vanished. No sound, no impact, just a momentary ripple in the black smoke-like surface. Futile, the geometer droned, now only 10 feet away. It was raising the key toward the footlocker. Knowing this was their final, desperate chance, Mac hurled himself into the open storage unit, tackling the wooden footlocker. He seized the lid, pulling it toward the corner. Vance. Distract it. Hit the pattern. Ethan didn't hesitate. He swung his crowbar, the one Mac had used to break out of the annex, and smashed it directly into the nearest glowing geometric symbol on the wall. The effect was instantaneous and violent. The entire corridor erupted in a blinding flash of green light. A sound like 1,000 glass panes shattering simultaneously blasted through the air. The geometer recoiled, letting out a screeching, high-frequency sound that hurt Mac's ears. The attack had worked, but only momentarily. The symbols on the wall dimmed but did not disappear. In the brief moment of distraction, Mac managed to slide the footlocker fully against the concrete back wall of the unit, wedging it tightly. He threw his entire weight against the lid, holding the brass padlock firmly shut with his hand. The geometer recovered, its anger palpable. It ignored Ethan and focused solely on Mac and the footlocker. You are protecting the lie, MacKenzie. You will become part of the pattern. The geometer took 2 giant strides, covering the distance instantly. It raised the iron bar above its head, preparing to strike Mac. Mac looked up at the towering, impossible figure. He knew a direct hit would kill him instantly. He closed his eyes, preparing for the end. Just as the iron bar began its downward arc, a sudden, blinding searchlight cut through the early morning haze from outside the facility. The distinct, loud womp-womp-womp of a heavy helicopter descended directly over the storage complex. The radio crackled to life, but this time it was clear and authoritative. This is containment lead. Code 47 Echo. Entity designation, geometer located. Protocol 7 Delta initiated. All personnel evacuate immediate vicinity. Fire solution inbound. The geometer froze, looking up at the ceiling. The sound of the helicopter, the sign of a greater, official, and perhaps even more terrifying power, had finally reached it. The booming sound of the military helicopter, coupled with the crackling, decisive voice of containment lead, introduced a new, frightening element to the chaos. The geometer, previously untouchable and supremely confident, was momentarily stunned. The protocol, the geometer hissed, its shimmering form flickering violently. They came for the lie. They came to silence the truth. Mac took advantage of the distraction. Still holding the footlocker shut, he yelled at Ethan. Vance. We need to move. That fire solution means they're going to level this place. Ethan scrambled into the unit beside Mac, grabbing the opposite side of the footlocker. They were now in a tiny, 3-foot-wide steel box, trapped between the closed lid of the host and the enraged geometer. The entity recovered quickly. It turned its attention from the helicopter and focused its immense frustration on the 2 men. It brought the iron bar down not on them, but on the concrete floor just outside the unit. The impact was deafening. The concrete cracked, and the entire structure of Block B shuddered. The glowing geometric symbols on the walls pulsed erratically, their light shifting from green to a volatile, blinding white. The geometer then made a final, desperate move. It dropped the iron bar and slammed its massive hands onto the sides of the storage unit door, bending the thick steel inward like tinfoil. The lie remains, the geometer screamed, its voice now pure, raw static. It reached inside, its black, smoky hand reaching directly for the padlock on the footlocker. Mac lashed out with his free hand, slamming his flashlight into the geometer's wrist. The touch seemed to momentarily stun the entity, which pulled its hand back, sizzling slightly. "The key, Vance. We have the silver one," Mac yelled. "Distract it." Ethan, seeing no other option, took the silver locker key and hurled it with all his strength down the corridor, away from L12B. The geometer roared in fury. Its form stretched, its attention momentarily split between the silver key and the footlocker. Just then, a voice, now amplified by megaphones, boomed from the helicopter above, echoing across the abandoned complex: "Fire solution in T-60 seconds. All unauthorized personnel must seek immediate cover. Repeat, 60 seconds." Mac knew they wouldn't survive a minute inside. "The vents, Vance. There has to be a way to the roof." They scrambled out of the unit, leaving the footlocker sealed. The geometer was focused down the corridor. Stalking the silver key, they found a narrow, rusted ladder leading up the side of the concrete wall, designed for roof access. They started climbing just as the geometer realized the silver key was a fake distraction. The entity turned, its head snapping towards the ladder. It stretched its arm, its fingertips grazing the bottom rung. The metal where it touched instantly corroded and dissolved into dust. "It's disintegrating the ladder," Ethan yelled, climbing frantically. Mac, seconds behind, grabbed the brass key the geometer had dropped in the scuffle. If this thing is a lie, maybe the truth is the only way to stop it. He looked up. They were 10 feet from the roof access hatch. The geometer was right beneath them, its massive hands tearing the ladder rungs out from under Mac's feet. With a final, desperate leap, Mac grabbed the edge of the roof hatch just as the geometer's shimmery hand closed around his ankle. A wave of bone-deep cold shot through him. "Mac!" Ethan pulled, wrenching the hatch open. Mac screamed, forcing his leg free, leaving a section of his uniform and a layer of skin behind. They tumbled onto the flat, gravel roof just as the helicopter swooped lower. It was not a police or medical chopper, but a gunship, bristling with heavy weapon systems. 30 seconds to impact. "Clear the target zone." Mac and Ethan looked over the edge of the roof. The geometer was climbing up the outside wall of Block B, moving with terrifying speed, its gaze locked on the brass key in Mac's hand. Suddenly, a blinding burst of white light erupted from the helicopter. A focused beam of energy, like a thick, tangible laser, struck the geometer directly in the center of its mass. The entity didn't burn or explode. Instead, it screamed, a raw, metallic sound of absolute agony, and its shimmering form instantly began to collapse inward, twisting, and folding into itself. As the light beam held steady, the geometer rapidly shrank, compressing into a tight, black, perfect geometric shape, no bigger than a grapefruit. The shape fell away from the wall and plummeted to the ground. The helicopter immediately broke off the laser attack. Target contained. Initiate sweep. Protocol 7 Delta complete. Mac and Ethan watched in stunned silence as the black geometric object landed near the base of the wall, seemingly inert, but before they could process the containment, a new, more immediate threat emerged. The black sedan, Agent Dorn's car, now riddled with bullet holes and dents, skidded to a halt below. Two figures in full tactical gear, wearing black uniforms with no identifying insignia, jumped out. They were carrying small, handheld scanners. They were not looking for the geometer. They were looking at the roof point. One of the figures raised a microphone. "Officers on the roof. Drop the artifact immediately. Failure to comply will result in lethal force. That is department property." They wanted the brass key. The command from below was clear and cold: drop your weapons and put the item down. That is ministry property. Mac and Ethan hunched on the gravel-strewn rooftop, gulping the morning air. Ethan glanced at Mac, who was clutching the old brass key, the only thing of real value in this life-or-death standoff. "The key, what is it, Mac?" Ethan whispered. "Is it the host's key? Or something else?" Mac stared at the key. It emitted no light, no heat, but it radiated a weight, ancient and absolute. Dorn says it's the final lock, Mac said, his voice raw. The geometer says it's the geometry of the first lie. They both want it. If they're willing to use lethal force against cops to get it, then it holds more than one city secret. Mac backed away from the edge of the roof. We can't give it up. If we do, they'll bury the truth about Thorne, about the host, and about what's under P-47 forever. But how do we get out? Ethan pointed at the hovering helicopter, a brutal symbol of state power. We can't outrun a chopper and 2 snipers. At that moment, the helicopter made a series of mechanical clacks. It didn't move, but the cockpit windows suddenly went dark. The craft began to lurch, emitting a strained, rising whine. The electronics are failing. Ethan realized, looking toward the black geometric box at the base of Block B's wall. The geometer wrecked the repeater station systems. It's still interfering. Mac nodded. It's compressed, but it's still a hole in their network. It's fighting back. That's our only chance. He sprinted to the far edge of the roof facing the adjacent office block. This building has a jump to the abandoned office next door. 20 feet. Get ready to jump. Before Ethan could protest, Mac charged, launched himself across the gap, and landed with a painful thud on the lower roof. Your turn, Vance. Ethan swallowed his fear, ran, and hurled himself over the void, rolling hard onto the opposite roof but making it across. The TAC team below reacted instantly. Stop them. Don't let them get away. Mac and Ethan tore down the exterior fire escape of the office building, spilling out into the deserted industrial street just as the team stormed the original rooftop. They kept running. We need somewhere safe. Ethan said. I know a place, Mac panted. Somewhere they won't risk making a public move. Back to Station 47. Ethan stared at him. Back there? That place is full of its shadows. Exactly, Mac said. P-47 is the center of the lie. If they're covering something up, they won't risk their containment squad grabbing us in there. Too many eyes. They looped around through alleys, keeping to the shadows, until they reached the perimeter of P-47. Daylight was up now, day shift officers were arriving. They slipped in through the rear staff entrance. Inside, the atmosphere had changed. P-47 was no longer empty. Regular officers were drinking coffee, shuffling reports. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. The entire back section, including the annex entrance and sublevel 3 access, had been sealed off with black and yellow barricade tape and guarded by 2 uniformed officers from no recognizable department. Mac and Ethan crouched behind a janitor's cart. Those aren't our people, Mac whispered. Containment. They've locked the whole scene down. At that moment, the front doors swung open and Agent Dorn, whom they'd watched get annihilated by the geometer, walked in. Bruised, suit shredded, but alive. He strode straight to the front desk, speaking with clipped urgency. All P-47 personnel are barred from the rear sector. Full lockdown. If anyone sees Detective MacKenzie or Officer Vance, report immediately. They are in possession of a restricted artifact. Dorn held up a warning placard. On it, a sketch of the brass key, and a blurred image of the plastic skull. We can't stay, Ethan whispered. They know we're back. We're boxed in. Mac stared at the brass key, hearing the echo of the geometer's words. Thorne understood the geometry. He became a key. Mac's gaze shifted to his office, the place he remembered hiding an old book. Vance, I've got an idea. We need to understand this geometry. Thorne tried to crack it. He left something in my office. They waited for Dorn to move toward the sealed sector, then slipped into Mac's cramped office. Mac locked the door and flicked on the desk lamp. He pulled an old law book from the shelf. It wasn't a law book. It was Officer Thorne's personal notebook, hidden inside the cover. Mac opened it. Inside were detailed sketches of the geometry, with shaky handwritten notes. It's not a pattern. It's a conduit. The center point isn't the host. The center point is the sound. They sealed the hole with the annex. But the sound still gets through. Thorne had drawn a diagram showing P47 and a point beneath it labeled lead point, the place where the old radio signal originated. Mac gripped the brass key. Thorne locked it, he said. But not the host. He locked. He froze, staring at the key. The brass key had no teeth. It was just a smooth cylinder. Mac understood. This wasn't meant to open a lock. It was a name. Right then, a heavy pounding rattled the door. "Open up, MacKenzie. We know you're in there." The sound of Agent Dorn and the containment team hammering on the office door was deafening. They were trapped, but Mac finally understood the gravity of Officer Thorne's actions. "The brass key isn't a lock pick, Vance," Mac explained quickly, holding up the smooth cylindrical key. "It's a tuning fork. A conductor." Thorne didn't lock away the host, he tried to lock away the signal. Ethan looked at the scrawled map in Thorne's journal. "The conduit point, where the sound comes from. Sublevel 3. We go through the ceiling," Mac decided. "This building is paper thin above the offices." Mac used the crowbar one last time, punching a hole through the cheap acoustic ceiling tile. He scrambled up into the dusty cavity, and Ethan followed just as the office door buckled under the force of the containment team. They crawled through the cramped, spiderweb-filled space, navigating above the fluorescent lights, hearing the shouts of the agents below them. Mac found the access hatch leading to the main HVAC system, a direct, sealed shaft that went straight down to the basement levels. They dropped into the pitch-black ventilation shaft, using the interior ladder rungs. They bypassed Sublevel 1 and kept going, descending into the forbidden darkness of Sublevel 3. When they emerged from the ventilation shaft, they were in the massive, brick-lined water pumping station that had been decommissioned and sealed decades ago. The air was frigid, the silence absolute. Ethan shone his flashlight around the vast, cavernous space. Water dripped from ancient pipes, echoing in the darkness. In the center of the room was a huge, circular concrete platform, the conduit point marked in Thorne's journal. The platform was covered in the same glowing geometric symbols, pulsating faintly, drawing power from the very earth, and on the platform, waiting patiently, stood Agent Dorn. He was bruised, but his suit was intact, and he held a military-grade sidearm aimed directly at them. "I knew you'd come here, MacKenzie," Dorn said, his voice quiet but sharp. Thorne's vanity was always his downfall. He couldn't just seal it, he had to leave a map. "What did Thorne seal, Dorn?" Mac demanded, stepping forward, shielding Ethan. "What is the geometer and what is the lie?" Dorn sighed, lowering his weapon slightly, a tired look crossing his face. "The geometer isn't a contagion, MacKenzie. It's the container. A physical manifestation of the geometry, the barrier that keeps the true lie from reaching the surface." He pointed to the geometric symbols on the platform. "This entire city was built on an anomaly. A tear. The geometry is a constant, ambient psychic interference that prevents the things down here from fully manifesting." "And the host?" Ethan asked. "The host is the first thing that broke through in 1990. Not a body, but a piece of the noise. The pure signal of the anomaly. Thorne found it, but instead of destroying it, he realized the geometry wasn't perfect. He figured out the conduit point was where the original noise was strongest. Mac held up the brass key. And he used this to silence it. Exactly, Dorn confirmed. This is a harmonic inhibitor. He inserted it into a specific frequency point here on the platform, disrupting the anomaly's ability to broadcast its signal, the noise that makes people crazy, that warps physics. He put the host in a locker, then buried the key to the inhibitor here, next to the sublevel 3 gate. Dorn raised his gun again. But now, the anomaly is repairing itself. And if you insert that key, you'll disrupt the containment and cause a catastrophic, permanent breach. Give me the inhibitor. No, Mac said simply. Thorn was silencing the noise. You just want to manage it. Mac looked at the platform. The pulsing geometry was strongest in the very center that he tossed the key to Ethan. The center, Vance. Stop the noise. Dorn fired. The bullet struck the wall, kicking up concrete dust. Ethan scrambled onto the platform, ignoring Dorn's shouts. He found a small, almost invisible indentation in the center of the pulsing geometry. It was the perfect size and shape for the brass key. Dorn fired again, the shot whizzing past Ethan's ear. Ethan shoved the brass harmonic inhibitor key into the slot and twisted. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The green light that bathed the room vanished. The low-frequency hum that had been present since they entered the station died. Sublevel 3 was plunged into total, profound, and unnatural silence. Dorn froze, his gun hand dropping. His eyes went wide, not with fear, but with sudden clarity. The frantic, stressed look that had defined him all night evaporated. He looked confused, like a man waking up from a dream. The noise, it's gone, Dorn muttered, dropping his gun. The lie, the pressure, what did we do? Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a massive, grinding sound from the ceiling above. The black, grapefruit-sized geometric object, the contained geometer, fell from the shaft, striking the concrete floor, but without the ambient energy of the geometry. The object was just inert matter. It didn't move, it didn't shimmer. It was silent. The sound of ordinary police sirens wailed faintly from the surface, the result of Mac's quick, 30-second transmission at the repeater station.